It's warming up, and hey, good afternoon, Grooners. Welcome, welcome. My name is Donato, and welcome to the Running Guru Show, here with my cup of tea, keeping calm and carrying on. And today we have a very special live broadcast where we have not one, but two marathon runners who completed their marathons only a week ago, and they're both called Dan. And we have Dan, who ran Boston Marathon, and Dan, who ran Brighton Marathon. So I'm going to refer to them as Boston Dan and Brighton Dan. So hello, Boston Dan.
Hello, Donato. Once again, we meet, and I'm psyched to be here.
Excellent. And hello, Brighton Dan.
Hello, pleased to be here. Looking forward to today's live chat.
Excellent, excellent, guys. So I'm really excited to have you both on, because obviously it wasn't long ago. Boston was the most recent that I ran, was only a year ago, and it would have been 2 years ago. And my very first marathon was Brighton 3 years ago. So it's great having you both on, having ran those races. I know the routes. It's just, I'm super excited to have you on. But I just wanted to, and there's going to be all sorts of people on there, but it's just a quick sort of summary in terms of show us your medals. And yeah, so if I go with, let's go with Brighton Dan first. Show us your medal. Yes, Brighton Dan, show us your medal.
So here is a medal here, and I believe I've got one of those fancy iTab things coming that goes on the back. You know, you spend money, it's your first marathon, you go a little bit overboard. So there is the medal, and I've got the t-shirt on here, the one they gave for free, because I wasn't going to pay to have the same t-shirt with the word finisher on.
Excellent. So you've done exactly as I did. I had an iTab, and you know, when it's your first marathon, it is a special thing. And I just wanted to say to those who are watching live, feel free to leave some comments on where you are, where you're listening from. But yeah, Boston Dan, show us your medal, the unicorn.
Oh my goodness, Spike the unicorn. There he is.
Oh,
This
wow.
is I haven't taken this off in a week.
Yes. What about you, Brighton Dan? Have you taken yours off?
Only to shower, otherwise no, it stays on.
You took it off while showering. Obviously, I've got to ask Boston Dan, did you take it off while showering? Anyway, so the reason why I wanted to do this, and Sarah has joined us from London, so Sarah also ran her first marathon at Brighton, and Sarah said she's gone over the top on merchandise, which will be one of the questions. I mean, in fact, I've got a list of questions, but I'll go straight into the merchandise one, where Sarah's bought the extra t-shirts, the hoodie, everything, and so I can see you nodding away there. So I've got to start with our man in Boston first, the merchandise that's available there. So come on, Dan, at Boston, what merchandise did you splash out on?
Well, after I revealed to my family how much it costs to actually register for the Boston Marathon, I was officially banned from purchasing any merchandise until it all goes on sale. So I am eagerly waiting and refreshing, the Adidas website and Marathon Sports website, and when the celebration jacket goes on sale, that'll be the one I snag. Otherwise, nothing else. No, I mean, they gave us these medals. Have I shown you the medal yet? And the free neon yellow shirt, and sticker and a magnet and a beer bottle opener. So, I think I'm off to a good start, but I haven't purchased anything.
Yeah, the celebration jacket, it was funny you mentioned about going on sale. Last year, I make a holiday when I go traveling, but I stayed on the last day I turned up at the Adidas store, Adidas, as some people pronounce it. And I went in there and I said, when are these things going to go on sale? He said, no. They won't go on sale,
Right.
So I eventually had to bite the bullet, and I did just buy the celebration jacket for Boston. And Sarah has corrected, it wasn't her first, it was her fifth marathon, but she still went over the top on the merchandise. So what merchandise did you go over on at Brighton?
So I didn't actually purchase any on the day. At the expo, I had a look around, and similar to Boston, Dan, I thought about the idea of maybe looking into what happens during the sale, which I believe they sent an email 24 hours later, which was a little bit cheeky for anybody who maybe purchased on the day. But keeping my eyes peeled to see if anything does crop up further down the line. But the designs were quite similar, I felt. So from the t-shirt I got, I thought I was quite happy with it. And yeah, I might still take a little look, and I might decide further down the line to dive into something. But otherwise, I was quite happy with what they gave. They also gave out a little water bottle at the end as well. So a lot of the freebies were quite nice. So I haven't purchased anything yet.
I think the freebies both at Boston and Brighton are very good, and all the marathons that I've done are pretty good, especially some of the food that you really do need at the finish. But as I was saying, the key thing about this is to help people who are watching, because there's going to be a lot of first timers coming on and watching this show and wondering how the hell, why, what, whatever. And I just wanted to kick off with the initial question, and I'll start off with our man in Boston. Is why run a marathon, and why Boston? Dan in Boston. So why run a marathon? And why Boston?
If you can answer the first question, the second question is to me obvious. But the why the marathon? I mean, you know, maybe it's because I live in Boston that I've been exposed to the Boston Marathon ever since I was a child, and this is a true event. It's a holiday in Massachusetts. It's called Patriots Day, but it's a holiday so that we can watch the marathon. So it's been part and parcel of every cell in my body, the marathon. And I think every year that I've been a spectator, I've said myself, and I've heard other spectators say, next year, that'll be the year that I run the Boston Marathon, because everyone gets really amped up and motivated to do so. So the marathon meant a lot to me because of some health issues that I went through, as we discussed in our last time we talked. So for 15 years, I had, you know, a really serious medical condition that left me, you know, basically bedbound for 15 years. So, you know, to just to have this opportunity to move my legs again is incredible, and I'm grateful for it. And then the Boston Marathon is always, you know, looking over my shoulder for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I did realize, as you said, it is a holiday, and it is a real big deal in Boston and in the whole of Massachusetts, if not the US. You know, Boston Marathon is seen as it is the epitome of, like, the Royal Ascot of horse racing here in the UK, and the Grand National of it is, you know, the Boston Marathon is the marathon. And the fact that it's on a holiday, it's a holiday in Massachusetts, is that right? It's not a national holiday, it's holiday in Massachusetts, is that right, Dan?
Boston, Massachusetts, yeah.
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 So, I mean, that's a big state in itself, but I could see from the crowds that turn up, and it is almost like it's in your blood. You know, you've grown up. This year was the 123rd year. So you're not 124 years old, Dan. So it's been there since before you were born, before I was born. So I can see it's part of the DNA. So Dan in Brighton, you know, the same question to you. Why run a marathon, and why Brighton? I appreciate you live in Surrey, but why Brighton?
So it was actually about 365 days to the day that I decided to sit down, and I wanted to challenge myself. I want to do something different. And I thought, well, this running thing, I'm sure, is quite easy in my naivety. And I thought, well, that doesn't require much specialist equipment. I can just grab a pair of shoes. I've got a £20 pair of shoes. That'll be simple. And I typed into Google marathons 2020, in fact, because at that time I wasn't sure how soon I'd be able to actually do a marathon. And Brighton happened to come up in 2019. I just thought, well, if this is going to be a challenge, why not just step up a little bit and book it? And it all fell into place, really, because I hadn't realised at the time that I was in that window where you could book a ticket for Brighton. I didn't know about ballots. I didn't know about anything to do with marathons. And Brighton is somewhere that I've loved visiting as a tourist. And so when I saw it, I just thought, Brighton, that's completely flat. That's just running up and down the promenade, having a wonderful time in the sun. That'll be a piece of cake. And that's how it just fell into place by complete chance. But like I say, the day I ran the marathon, I think was day 366 or something, since I started running as part of my challenge.
Wow. So it is one of those. Well, for me, it's an iconic race because you are running on the seafront. And when I ran it both times, and obviously when you ran it, it was a beautiful sunny day. So I can't imagine anything more nicer than running along the promenade. As you say, we do have these naive thoughts, and I could see that Dan in Boston was laughing. And I don't know whether the audience, if you want to leave some comments, and good afternoon, Cole, over in sunny Yorkshire. So we've got Carl, Sarah, we've got quite a few watching live. If you want to ask any questions, by the way, guys, I'm turning my head to look at the screen with the questions. So for those of you watching, feel free to leave some questions. And I don't know what the sun is like for you in the US, Boston, but here it's about 22 degrees Celsius, and we've had 4 continuous days of glorious sunshine here, so nice and hot. But yeah, how I could see Dan in Boston was chuckling away, and I was chuckling away. I don't know whether the audience could see us in our little icons in the corner, but when Dan was talking about Brighton and 20-pound shoes and just a little jaunt along the flats, it's interesting that sometimes I think our naivety helps us in terms of taking it on, because I think when you see it that way, and having seen, whilst I've not watched Dan Leone's, doesn't have a YouTube channel, I know that Dan Brighton does have a YouTube channel. I've left the link in the description. You go over to Dan's, called Dan Runs Vlog. Is that sometimes our naivety helps us to overcome a lot of the hurdles. We think, well, you know, what more can there be to it than just putting some shoes on and running? You know, it's only 26 miles, you know. But hey, how do we listen? Which leads me neatly to, you know, what did you do in terms of training? Because I've got to say, a lot of people, when I remember getting my first, it was half marathon, and in the instructions it had the words respect the distance. Whilst a half marathon is half the distance of a full marathon, the clue is in the word half marathon. Yeah, 13.1 miles. It's still a long way for a non-runner, which I was. So it said respect the distance. So a quick comment back from Colin Yorkshire saying congratulations to Dan and Dan. So well done to you guys. So if I start off with our man in Brighton, so it's 365 days. So you then, what did you do in terms of training for you to get to the start line at Brighton this year? Okay, so I would say if we went backwards from the marathon, that 16-week training block was where I was taking it most seriously and had the most understanding of what I was expected to do. Prior to that, I was literally running around my local area with no idea what I was actually trying to achieve, other than just having a wonderful time, just running and not stretching, not doing anything like that, just thinking, grab a quick drink, head out, and I'll have a wonderful time. So it was really only in that last training block where I started to follow a plan, watch a lot of videos, do a lot of research, and focus in on the goal. And yeah, like you say, respect the distance, because I knew when I started doing it, if you like, properly, that there was a method to achieving that distance and it needed to be respected, and I didn't take it lightly. So whilst it is 365 days, it was only really the last 16 weeks that I started to become more of an athlete and more of a runner, and to get myself to the stage where I could actually get to the start line, I think, first and foremost. Yeah. I think obviously what you've said, where you said you were just running around, that does have good benefits to it and get you ready for the people talk about a 16-week training plan, a block, or 20 weeks, or some, and I'll come on to this, just to turn up at the race and go. And I'm sure you might have seen some of those, and I think, and I'll come on to that one. I could see that Dan over in Boston was chuckling, so I know that he's ready for the next question. So Sarah Brandis has mentioned, she's left a comment that she signed up for her first marathon, which was NYC. I mean, what a first marathon to sign up to. And she says, quote, I barely knew what a marathon was. and she was having a quarter-life crisis and needed a challenge. How naive I was. So, but Sarah, you completed it. That's the main thing, and you completed Brighton. So, so you obviously then took it serious, Dan, in terms of the 16-week block, and you followed a structured training plan. Where did that training plan come from, or did you just make it up?
No, so I spent a little bit of time online one evening, and I got every plan I could find, from the London plan to Manchester to Brighton and to some marathons abroad. And what I sort of did was amalgamate them into a plan that would work for me, knowing that, like you say, I'd done some running before, so I had developed an aerobic base of sorts. And I just started to look at them because obviously using a very, very beginner plan wasn't quite suitable for me because I could already run a distance of sorts. So I just kind of got a little bit of a custom plan together that followed a thread that you would build up distance over time, over the weeks, roughly 10% or so. And yeah, I just did a lot of research, a lot of video watching, and I took advice from people online, actually, rather than people around me who had never run a marathon. They love to give advice, yet they haven't run one themselves.
That's a very famous quote there, Dan, that there's a lot of people who are offering advice but have never actually done it themselves. But Dan, over in Boston, the same question to you, and obviously we were chuckling away that what did you do in terms of training for Boston? And by all means, throw in that you told us before the call that this wasn't your first marathon. You had done some other marathons, but you just rocked up to those, didn't you, without any training? So you can go through with us and explain to those who may be watching that just turning up to a marathon and running it and how that compares to doing some training, because obviously for Boston, you took that quite serious. So yes, Dan, over in Boston, if you want to go through in terms of what you did in terms of training for Boston, and maybe throw in a bit of what happened with your other marathons.
Sure. So back in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in DC, and I ran the Ocean State Marathon in Rhode Island. Both beautiful marathons, one along the waterfront and one through DC, which of course is beautiful. And but those essentially I just kind of showed up for, it was one of those things. I wasn't really serious. I definitely was running every day on the Charles River. I was definitely, just a casual runner and a weekend warrior. But in terms of that kind of distance, no, I had no respect for the distance. I did not understand what it meant. I oversimplified it. And as other Dan had mentioned, there are people who give you advice, and I was probably, thinking the same way. Some people were telling me that, well, if you can run a 10K, it's only 4 times greater than that, whatever, some stupid math that really isn't valid. And some oversimplification, and that's what I went with. And so I did really poorly. Essentially, I walked. I mean, you'd run, whatever, 10 miles and then die, and then the rest of it is just survival. And I knew that if I ever ran again, that it would be something that I would take more seriously and respect the distance. And so that's what I did. And at some point, when I was just working on my base, my aerobic base for the most part, just again casually running, no real plan. And then I was assigned a bib through a local charity, the Salucci ALS, the UMass Salucci ALS Fund, which really meant a lot to me, of course, because ALS means a lot to me. And so it was an honor to be able to run with them. But then I knew I had to get serious. What do I do? 20 weeks out. I can't just show up. I mean, there are team members. There are people who take this seriously, and I knew that I wanted to take it seriously, obviously, because people are donating money to see me succeed, and I want to make sure that I don't let anyone down. So what I did was I went to the well, I mean, I probably watched every single YouTube video ever made, and and tried to amalgamate, like Dan said, some sort of plan that made sense. And then I think I landed on a Strava plan. Just all of a sudden Strava, just showed up somewhere in my feed, and I was just kind of like, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I think they use some Macmillan approach, and they, send you, daily emails. Today's goal is, 6 miles at this pace, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
800 and blah, blah, blah. And everything. And so I did that, and I did it rather religiously, and I'm surprised because I'm not a very disciplined soul. And so to have the discipline to get up every morning and do it was a testing ground for me. That was not something that I did intuitively. It's something
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really had to think about and to do. And for the most part, I was pretty religious about the training plan.
So basically, obviously, I was in training for, I think the 16-week training started on Christmas Eve, and that was 16 weeks. So you were notified you had 20 weeks. So you built up from that. And so your training was, you would mainly go out and train first thing in the morning
Yeah.
before work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes obscenely early in the morning.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
to get it done, just because I know the longer the day goes, for me, my personality, the longer the day goes, the more reasons there are not to run. And so I mean, there are times some of my long runs were at 3:30 in the morning for the
wow.
street of Boston. So it's, just a lot of like urban wildlife and
Urban wildlife, I don't
and
ask.
shady characters in the side of the road. But
Yeah,
I had the headlamp and the lighted vest, and just kind of ran up one street and back down the same street because it was well lit.
yeah.
And so, but yeah, I was
You've
fairly
done what
committed.
needed to be done, basically, and you got the gear on. You had the right gear on. You were well lit. And I was going to ask our man in Brighton, is when did you do your training runs? Were you a morning man as well, before work or lunchtime or after work? Everyone's quite different. Or did you mix
Yes.
it up?
So the Monday to Friday runs were always done after work. I found that running was quite freeing for me and gave me that headspace. So what I didn't really want to be doing is clouding my mind with what was going to be happening that day at work. I wanted to run after work indeed, and just let the day go. Whatever happened during the day was going to be going.
Yeah.
And then the long runs would happen at the weekends, and they'd typically be around about 7 or 8 in the morning that we'd kick those off, because I ran with a group towards the latter half of my training.
Okay, that's an interesting one. So you were running with groups. So over in Boston, we obviously at 3:30 a.m. I guess, like with myself, often I do some runs at 4:30 a.m. There's not many people available to run with you at those times, is there? Down over in Boston. So I'm guessing you're on your own most of the time.
Yeah, but that's just been part of my personality too. I don't know how to run with a group, and I don't know what to expect. I've thought about joining, the Heartbreak Hill running clubs for their weekly runs, and or whomever, and I actually kind of talked myself out of that. So most of my runs were, well, all my runs were solo ventures, just me in my own head.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
there are plenty of times I wish I had a group, but again, I just don't know how to even
Mhm.
behave in that group. Like, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah,
am I forced to run fast? Am I slowing other people down? Am I, whatever. So I just did it
yeah,
on my own.
yeah. I mean, the key take I take both from both Dans with regards to preparation in terms of what you do in terms of the training. And I appreciate that some people who are watching don't follow a structured plan, but the purpose of a plan is just to run consistently. So whilst there may be people who don't really have a plan, they are still running consistently. So the plan forces you to run consistently in a particular pattern. So both of you are following that. Both of you were respecting the distance, and obviously they are both major marathons in their own regards. So obviously the race itself. So for those beginners out there, it is essential to follow some kind of structure. And I think there's so many plans out there. I think the beginner one, similar to Dan in Brighton, my beginner one, I think it said you had to be able to run continuously for 20 minutes before you could start the plan. So that's how much of a beginner I was. So, you know, if you can't run for 20 minutes continuously, then you can't really start that particular plan. So you need to reach a certain level of fitness to start. And it's interesting that our man in Boston was saying that, you know, just rocking up to the start and you ended up walking most of it. So whereas I'm going to go on to how the actual race went. So I'll start off with our man in Boston. So you've done the training. It's now morning. Talk us through, down in Boston, your day and the race itself, how it all went, you know, from, I presume an alarm clock went off, or did your wife or children come knocking on your door and say, Daddy, it's Boston Marathon Day, let's go. And they brought you the kit and everything. Talk us through your day. Talk us through the day at Boston. Because I remember seeing on Twitter, and I was getting nightmares of the previous year. All I saw was torrents and torrents of rain and wind. And this was, I think, 5 a.m. Boston time, 6 a.m. Boston time. But it was from a mainstream media channel. And sometimes they do play up the weather, but it just looked really bad. So talk us through, down in Boston, how the day started and how the race went for you.
So it was, the first thing was that all the running groups, all the social media was talking up the weather, and I just at some point shut down and just said, I don't care anymore. Whatever it is, I'm gonna run or walk or crawl. I mean, it doesn't matter.
The weather is the weather. We can't do anything about the weather.
Right, and this is Boston, so you know, if you don't like
it changes
the weather,
every 5 minutes in Boston.
But you know, it definitely, you know, other than preparation, it didn't really factor into my week at all. So I wasn't too stressed about the weather. I wasn't going for any miraculous times or anything like that. So, you know, the weather wasn't going to get to me or psych me out. And so I slept remarkably well, because these are the type of things that I would not sleep for. And yet I did sleep remarkably well. I mean, I was up every hour to pee because I was trying to stay
You're
hydrated.
Drinking too much tea, Dan.
And you know, I was drinking a lot the days before the marathon, so you know, I woke up every hour to pee, but I fell right back to sleep, so that was good. And somewhere around 4 o'clock in the morning, my alarm went off, and I immediately just made myself a bowl of oatmeal, or as I guess you guys call it, porridge.
Yeah.
And just a small something to just settle my stomach and get something in me. And at that point, it was staring at my kit and going, you know, picking everything up and putting it back down again. And
do I have to put this on?
Changing my mind and, you know, trying to figure out where I'm going to stick the nutrition packs, you know, where they were going to go and things like that. So there were last minute changes, as you're not supposed to do, but you know, again, I'm a rookie at this. So, you know, and that's it. And then what was really good is that I heeded your advice, Donato, and I took the bus from downtown Boston to Hopkinton. There was a little bit of, you know, banter and funness in on the bus ride, but what it forced me to do was not show up too early, because I would have been that person to take my car to Hopkinton at 5 in the morning, and yet I'm not starting until 11:15 in wave 4. So that didn't happen. So I didn't have to just sit in a puddle of mud in the athletes' village. So that was good. So I hopped on the bus. As soon as I got off of the bus in Hopkinton, it was just business. It was boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Pee again. And, you know.
It's very organized, isn't it? They are.
Yeah.
It's so regimented.
It's so organized. And then just getting herded, you know, it's probably a half an hour walk to the starting line.
Yeah.
I was expecting to get corralled and sort of held in place until some sort of national anthem or gunshot or something happened and then go. No, everyone was already moving. I didn't realize we had started. I'm
Yeah.
literally standing on the starting line going, oh, I guess I'm supposed to start moving now. And so that's when I started.
Yeah, yeah. So you got started, and I have to say the organisation over at Boston, and people say, well, obviously they've done it for 123 years, but it was very, very disciplined, and they had changed because of the weather and how it may impact. There were some tweaks, and whilst I didn't turn up, they were still sending me the updates of. I think to ensure that the athletes were kept warm and dry, because obviously it was torrential rain. For the early starters, they were getting on the buses, and it was, as I was getting on the early buses last year, you just get soaked before you even get on the bus and arrive there and wait. But it seemed really good. So because of where you were starting, I think there is a national anthem in the first wave and all that, and a way to go, the elite athletes. But by the time they get to the second, third, fourth, fifth wave, it's just get in your line and go. So you were off, and then you're going downhill, yeah? And you were feeling good. I was tracking you, Dan, and I could see that you were following a steady pace. So you've now started the race. How did you feel?
It was.
Was it a bit surreal?
It was surreal. I had done one of my long runs starting in Hopkinton, so I was familiar with the route, and I knew the downhill could get me, and all I wanted was slow and steady. That's just what I wanted to do, and not get caught up in the jostling for position or anything like that. I just wanted to just sort of turn inward and just stay at some pace that made sense to me, and without looking at my watch. Like I wasn't, slave to my watch. Again, this is survival. It's not, I don't care if I'm 6 seconds off from something, some random number. So that made no difference to me. So in fact, my watch was covered with my tube or my buff. And that was it. And I just settled in. It was downhill. At this point, the rain had stopped. And it looked very hopeful that the rain was going to stay off of us. But it still didn't really register that.
Did you believe that you were there in Boston Marathon? You've started one of the top marathons in the world, and you are there surrounded, because you're surrounded by thousands of runners all around you. You're all there having a good time. Yeah,
absolutely. It didn't, from the runner's perspective, from my perspective, thinking about the other runners, I didn't notice the party atmosphere or anything like that, even though I was back of the pack, wave 4, going slow. I didn't notice that. I think everyone was just kind of in their zone, doing their thing, and trying not to psych themselves out. And I just wanted to stay in that place also. But I mean, the spectators all along the route. I mean, there's spectators literally everywhere. I think that I heard 500,000 spectators. I mean, that's just an amazing number when you think about it. I mean, and everyone was having a good time, and that's where the parties were, and it was great to see the spectators along the way.
Yeah, it is quite something. And then obviously you then get to Heartbreak Hill. And your family were there. So whilst Boston, for those who don't know, Boston is one of the toughest routes of the marathon majors. I think New York takes the biscuit in terms of the toughest, but Boston is the second toughest. And whilst it's a net downhill, it's because there's so many hills on it. Going downhill is quite tough on the quads. And then when you're going uphill, it's tough on the calves. And it's an undulating area around Newton, which is where you live. So whilst you're familiar with it, it's undulating hills. I think there's 3 hills you have to climb up and down. And your family was at the top of Heartbreak Hill waiting for you. Yeah. How did that feel when you got up there, mile 18, and you're thinking, oh, I've got here?
Well, I mean, obviously, I trained a lot on Heartbreak Hill, so I know every step of Heartbreak Hill. I know where it undulates, and so
every tile. Every line,
literally, and I started to feel, what was I feeling? I think it was cramps in my calves as I started Heartbreak Hill. So
so you're hitting the hill and the calves are kicking in. Then,
and that kind of scared me because I knew that at my last long run, that 20-mile run, I really just couldn't go any further. So because of the calf cramps. So I tried to, keep my electrolytes up and tried to stay hydrated, thinking,
Yeah, yeah.
that was the key. And yet I started to feel the cramps again, but it really wasn't a big deal. I just kind of ran through those. I stayed hydrated, and whatever someone handed me for food, orange slice or whatever, I shoved it down my face. I mean, at some point you're in just pure delirium, and
Yeah.
they could have handed me a pile of mud, and I think I would have eaten. And but yeah, but my family was at the top, and my mother was at the top, and that means the world to me. My mom,
Wow.
of course, my dad died with ALS, as you know, and to have my mom there cheering me on, as well as my family and my children there cheering me on. They all had signs, and it was just such an amazing feeling, and it really did catapult me over the hill. It definitely gave me that surge of energy. I stopped for a couple of minutes, maybe to hug everyone and to shed a tear, and this was a very emotional time for me. One of a few emotional times, but this was definitely one of them. And they catapulted me over the hill.
I can really see that, Dan. The way you were just talking there, and the emotion that you must have felt. I mean, I think it would be difficult to put into words or pictures or images. But as you say, it's catapulted you over the hill, and it is something where obviously the reason why it's called Heartbreak Hill is that for a lot of people that's almost like the end of the race, where it does break a lot of people's hearts, because as you've just said, it's not just the hills, it's at the point that it is, around 18 miles, when your depletion is going down and getting cramps on the calves. The calves are saying, oi, I'm on some hills. So you're getting all those feelings. And that once you saw your family, then that catapulted you over, and you've reached the halfway, because I think it's then at mile 20, 21, and then the last 5-6 miles. Talk us through how that went. Was it just a daze? Did you sort of think, oh, just get me to the finish, when you saw the CITGO sign, CITGO? I think that's
Right.
1 mile to go. And then they say right on Hereford, left on Boylston. And then you see the finish line. It seems like a mile away. Will I ever get there? How was it from Heartbreak Hill?
So, like I said, they catapulted me over the hill. And so that was great, but literally just over the hill. At that point, I still needed to dig deep. I needed to dig really deep at 21 and 22. And now there's a lot of factors. It's a head game. There's some boredom involved too. Um, uh, at some point, emotions take over, and you're almost angry. Like, what am I doing here? What's this all about? I think if there was someone with a car in, somewhere in the last 4 miles, just kind of waiting for me, I think I would have.
You would have got in the car.
Okay, I'm done. And so, I had to really dig very deep. And I always had this mantra, and I kept it with me throughout my training. And I always would say, go deep. And I would say it out loud, go deep, go deep, go deep. And then I kind of shut out the world at that point. I don't even see the footsteps in front of me. I don't hear the crowds anymore. I really just kind of turn inward, and it's one foot in front of the other. And until of course the right on Hereford, the right on Hereford and left on Boylston, where then it's sheer utter disbelief. This cannot be happening. And I remember throwing my hands up as I got around onto Boylston. I remember putting my hands to my head and crying. I shed a lot of tears that day. I don't know where the hydration came from, and saying, "This isn't real. This isn't real. This is not happening. I'm going to wake up from this dream. I'm going to tell everyone about it, but this can't be happening." and that's when I started to sprint, using giant air quotes here, and I went to the finish line and then promptly collapsed. But
Wow,
yeah,
wow. Just you talking through that, Dan, made my arms come up with goosebumps and the hair standing up, because I had the very same emotions that you had,
yeah,
when you turn there, because the crowds on Hereford Street and Ballston was just insane, and there's people screaming at you, and obviously, you know, the way you just described that, and when you step over the line, you can think, I'm sorry, someone's going to wake me up and tell me this is a dream, because have I really finished Boston Marathon? But I can see, Dan, you finished Boston Marathon. You've got the medal around you, and you should be really proud of that.
Oh, you want to see it?
An amazing achievement. Show us again.
There it is. There's Spike the unicorn.
Spike, yes, I did notice that they were giving away toys last year. I think Spike, there's a Adidas had a toy called Spike.
Yes.
Where that's some merchandise you can buy, Dan, and post it over to everybody in the UK.
I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, to the list of merchandise.
There were so many spectators, and it was crazy that it felt like every single one of them was there for you.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
An amazing feeling.
And that they are for you, and then that medal gets around your neck, and you're thinking, yeah, you done it.
Yeah, give me a beer.
I'll come on to this. So, Dan, over in Brighton, I could see the smiles there and the nodding. It really doesn't matter. And some of the comments I'm getting through, there's a lot of people. Obviously, the world is waking up and spotting that we're on live. So we've got Tom Dillon, Mark Hanford, Richard Bays, Colley's over. They're all having a bit of a chat between themselves. And Tom Dillon was at Boston with you, Dan. So he said wind, rain and cold came again at mile 23 for the finish. Yes. And the roar on Boston is something every runner should feel. And to me, it was like a sea of noise. So, yeah. And some people are saying you should run Boston in Lincolnshire in England. That one is totally flat. And everybody loves your bling, Dan. So
thank you.
They are loving that bling. They are loving old Spike. Richard Bay said, obviously, running Boston in Lincolnshire would be much cheaper, which is true.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah,
obviously,
way. If I lived where you lived, Dan, over, and there is a connection here. You live in the section of district of Brighton in Boston. So if I lived there, I'd want to run Boston every year. It would be it's a given. But I'll come on to the next question. But over Dan in Brighton, you've been very patient there, waiting there, nodding away and smiling. I think the emotions are pretty much the same, whatever the marathon is. But Brighton Marathon, I have wonderful memories of clear blue skies and being beside the seaside. It's a wonderful city, and like you said earlier, Dan, is one reason why I chose it is I'd been there many a times for a day out and whatever, and I thought, what a beautiful place to run a marathon on the seaside, on the prom. You just have a little jaunt in the sunshine. How difficult can it be? So, obviously, you did explain it was a bit more difficult, but in terms of talking through Brighton, it's quite different to Boston in many ways. But for yourself, do you want to talk us through your experience from the race? I mean, my understanding is that the bibs, you select your bibs the day before at the expo. I think that still happens. So we'll skip forward that you've because obviously, and just explaining to the viewers, the reason why Brighton do this, and I think they're the only ones that do this, which is quite unique, is that when you train, when you've signed up for a marathon and you say, this is my predicted finish time, that predicted finish time for when you enter, whether it be 300 days before or however many weeks before, when you do the training, you may feel differently on the day before or the week before. So it allows you to select which corral you start it in based on how you feel at that time, which I think is really good. And when I say it's very different, I know Boston do the same as well, is you have a predicted time. Obviously, you've got a qualifying time to get in, but they do ask, I think, up to a month before you can submit if you've ran a faster time you can submit that, because for Boston it's all based on your race times, not predicted times. So it's your qualifying time to get you in the corral. Whereas Brighton, it's what you feel you think you can do, which I think is really good. And I really love that you can do that, and how they organize that. And you just go to the expo, select the corral, they give you a bib, a pretty random number, and then away you go. So for you, Dan, over in Brighton, do you want to talk us through the morning of the race and how you prepared, how you got ready? So for a lot of those novices, it was your first marathon. Talk us through how you felt, the emotions, how you prepared. Did an alarm go off, or did someone come knocking on your door, or were you in a noisy hotel and people were knocking on your door at 2 a.m.? Not like I did, but hey, I'm waking you up because they were all on an all-night party, just turning up for the marathon. How did it go for you, Dan? Talk us through your day and the race.
Yeah, so I was over in Brighton for the night. I picked up my things on the Saturday, ready for Sunday. And in terms of sleeping well, I don't know. It's not your own bed. It's not somewhere you can just get up in the middle of the night and have a little wander and do things that you want to calm yourself down. So I woke up in the morning, tried to keep things as routine as much as I could. The week leading up to it, I tried to wake up at a similar time. So I just get into that mindset, because it's a real mental game. That last week, your fitness is there. It's just now getting your head in the right place to be able to get to the start line. And I suppose the hotel was about 35 minutes walk. And I did it on purpose because I thought I'm going to need that just to get rid of those nerves.
Yeah.
And there were people who were jumping into taxis and all sorts, but I thought actually I need this walk, just a bit of positive self-talk and just get myself.
Hello.
They initiate zone, and it's just the nicest, warmest feeling to know that you're around people who are about to experience the same thing as you. And so when I turned up at Preston Park, which is a park that I've driven past many times going to Brighton, but of course it's relatively residential, so I wouldn't have ever spent any time there as a tourist. You're just looking around and there's just waves of people who are there for so many different reasons, and you just know that you're all about to do something that is very special, whether it's your first time or your 10th time. And yeah, I think I wasn't as overwhelmed as I thought I would be until I started. And then on reflection, that first 5K, I was overwhelmed in terms of emotions, because I've got people shouting at me who are strangers and they're cheering me on. And that's a very peculiar thing to experience, because you don't experience that on a day-to-day.
It's not really British, is it? Yeah.
It's not. And, they're saying, you're looking strong. And I'm thinking, I hope so. I've only been running 2 minutes. But yeah, so in terms of getting to that start line, it was worthwhile me just taking that moment for myself, a bit of a moment of self-reflection. And then, as I say, when the race started, I had some times in mind and a pace that I wanted to kind of stick to. And I just did that more as a distraction, really, so I could have something else to focus on. If I found myself in a situation that it was becoming quite difficult, I could then just look at my watch and think, okay, let's just tick these minutes by. But like all things, no matter how much you prep, I couldn't anticipate the course on the day, the hills, the weather, and those sorts of things. So a pace is just a guideline, and that's my big takeaway, I suppose, as a first timer. You can't sit there and say this is my pace, because you're not running a completely flat course on a beautiful, balanced temperature. It's just the way things are. But yeah, it was certainly quite an atmosphere, and the people were just overwhelmingly supportive.
Yeah, because the start is the mass start. Whilst everyone's in corrals, you all gather at Preston Park, which is one big field full of tens of thousands of runners. Yeah, because I think it's around 15,000 or 20,000. I heard a figure of 20,000. Anyway, a lot, all in one field. And then they start calling people to get into their corrals. But I definitely I know there's an elite start at a different section where there's about 300 or 400 people. But the mass start, you're all in one big field at Preston Park, and you start off with a little hill, isn't it?
That was, yeah. Nobody told me about that bit.
You didn't
well-
watch my video, mate.
Well, I say nobody told me. I did watch your video. I watched it the night before. But you know when you've decided in your head, okay, I can see the road ahead of me, and I thought
Yeah.
I was running straight on. Then
No, they
suddenly
said you left.
we're all going left. And I'm thinking, hang on here. I can see
Yeah.
that flat path ahead of me there. But that was actually quite nice because it kind of kick-started that kind of mental process of, okay, now you need to start to understand there's going to be some technique involved here. You can't just sprint as fast as you can up this hill. You need to be really mindful that there's going to be different terrain here. So it was actually quite nice on reflection to just calm that nerves sensation. I couldn't go off too fast because that first hill stopped me from doing that. It was as simple as that.
Did you start with a pacer? Were you running with a pacer?
No, the pacer that I had my eye on was a 4:15 person, but they were in the corral next to me. So I was in blue when I should have been in yellow. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
The bib pickup, it was what it was. But yeah, I didn't have them to run next to, but when they caught up with me, I was able to sort of keep them on my shoulder for as long as I needed to. But equally, I kind of knew I'm just going to take it easy until they catch up with me. Then I know that I'm onto a rough pace.
Excellent. I'll come back, Dan, in terms of how that race continued. I've been getting all sorts of comments here. And Dan Leone, you might recognize this person's name, Lydia Biassi. She said she's very proud of my friend Dan, and she was cheering him on at Heartbreak Hill. So it wasn't just your family. And I'm guessing by the name, that sounds like a really good Italian name as well. So hello, Lydia.
Very good Italian girl.
Boston. Hello, Lydia in Boston.
Hello, Lydia.
Jeff Blackman said he was from Kent in UK. He was running Brighton last week as well. So well done, Jeff. And James Benjamin is enjoying the chat here between the three of us and some great topics. So coming back to you, Dan, in Brighton. So you've started and you're settling into your pace, and there's little lumps and bumps, shall we say? I'll put that politely with Brighton. So it's unlike Boston, which is a 6 mile downhill to start with, which totally smashes your quads. Brighton is a little bit of up and down for the first 6 miles, isn't it? Yeah, because you're going through the centre of town, you're going through the Taj Mahal, Brighton Pavilions, which looks like the Taj Mahal. So yes, for those who haven't visited Brighton, if you're ever in the UK, go to Brighton and go and visit it. It's a great city. So it's a little lumpy and bumpy. How did you contend with that? Were you just sort of just settling in and not worrying about the terrain, that it was going up and down, Dan?
Yeah, I did try my best to settle into it. I hadn't been down to view the course, which you could argue either way about whether that was a good or bad thing. But I wanted to kind of just experience the marathon in all its glory. I didn't want to make it feel too business and too much of well, here's another long run doing the same route I've done already. So it's more the people around you, I suppose. You need to really be focusing on what you want to do, because there's one of the hills early on, I think it kind of goes up just by a primary school, goes up and then straight round. Yeah. And then there's a people who are verbally not happy with the terrain and they're struggling with it. And I'm just thinking, okay, I've got to just be positive, people. Be positive, because it can get to you if you start hearing this is the hardest hill I've ever run up, and when will it ever end? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm sort of finding it not too bad, but again, I'm taking it easy. I'm not looking down at my watch. I'm just getting through this first bit and relaxing into it. Yeah.
Did you find? I mean, I've found, and I might ask Dan over in Boston as well, because some of the races I've been, I've heard exactly the same, where people are shouting out things, and you think, will you just shut up? But it's like, we don't need running commentary that this is a really tough hill and when's this, when's that. But you managed to shut it out. Did you find that in Boston? Were any people talking about, oh my God, this Heartbreak Hill, I can't cope anymore?
No,
they're all out of breath, aren't they?
No, as far as the run is concerned, I didn't notice anything like that. I did have one conversation with the female at the end of the last couple of miles where she was like, tell me this is over soon. And I was like, yeah, I mean, look at the Sitco sign up there, and you're a mile away.
Yeah, a mile to go, and she felt happy then. But back to our Brighton, man. So, because you go away from the city, and then you turn around and then come back to the city. So but it's a little gentle incline coming back. So you're now coming back. How does that feel psychologically, where you're coming back to where you started, but you know you've got to go away again? How did you deal with, whilst it's beautiful seaside, and it was a sunny day, wasn't it, Dan, from what I recall?
It was I would say, it was a bright day. The weather was a bit chilly in the morning, a couple of degrees. It did get warmer, and obviously I'll talk about the wind later on, but that was, I guess, the biggest contender in terms of the weather was the wind rather than the heat, because I felt actually very comfortable. I was only wearing a kind of a running vest, and there were some people there, as you'll be aware, in all sorts of uniforms and outfits, and I wonder how much they may have struggled, because it was certainly warm as a runner, I felt, out on the course. But when I sort of ran back, when you get to that halfway point by the marina, by the pier, and the crowds are there, you do get this sensation of, well, I'm kind of halfway done, and this is possible now. Certainly I felt that halfway. I thought, well, I'm halfway done. This feels more of a comfortable environment to be in. Of course, not appreciating what was ahead of me further down the other end of the course, which is a miserable place to visit. It really is. But
the power station, the famous power station.
I don't know what it's famous for. It's certainly not a pleasing sight when you're running underneath it.
Yeah, because I found the crowds in Brighton were huge from around, obviously when you get back into the city. I mean, it's a very well laid out course to make sure you can get spectators at all different points, different miles, rather than just I think that's the challenge with Boston, is it's one straight line from one section to another, whereas Brighton, they send you around a couple of loops, different sections, so you're seeing the same people. But the crowds are absolutely huge, and it is relatively, once you've gone back to the city, it's then flat all the way around. But you mentioned it's known as the famous power station, because similar, you have Heartbreak Hill in Boston, you have the power station of Brighton, where from mile 18, and again, it's that famous mile 18, and I remember vividly jumping into the Portaloos there because I needed to pee, but I came out and that was the end of my race. I could hardly move my legs. But mile 18, you go around the power station, come back round, and then to mile 23. So that's 5 miles of an out and back around the power station. And then you start the sprint back, the last 3 miles back along the prom. So talk us through that, Dan, in terms of, because I could see people who've run it. I've seen some other videos, and it did look, as you say, it had warmed up a bit. But I'm guessing that's where the wind kicked in. Was that when the wind was kicking in? So you're now running into the wind, as nice and sunny as it is, and people say, oh, it's only a park run, but that last 3 miles of a marathon, it's more than a park run, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, well, you've come off the back of the power station, you've got through that section, you know there's that park run to go, so your spirits are high, and you know you're digging deep, and it is getting tough, but the wind was, straight, you're running into it, it's straight at you, and it was one of those situations where, certainly for me, I felt like as hard as I tried, I couldn't go any quicker. I was just maintaining a pace, and the wind was working its way against me, and I was just
cooling you down.
It was certainly cooling me down. Yeah, I didn't get to the end feeling overheated, that's for sure. But of course, you've still got spectators, and credit to them for standing in that mile before you begin to come down to the finish line, because it's a bit more of an open area, and you wouldn't necessarily stand there as a spectator. But they filled both sides of the track, and it did certainly help. I mean, at that stage, I put some music in, because I made a decision that I would just give myself a little bit of energy before I hit that final section. But yeah, it was the wind really that was the main contender in slowing us all down, I think. But equally, you've got that camaraderie of people who are starting to struggle, and everyone else just saying, come on, we're doing well now. Even the seagulls are struggling, don't worry about it.
It's funny you should say that, Dan, because I remember running along and I could see this seagull just hovering, and I'm thinking, is it that windy? Because they're just coasting, aren't they, in the wind. But yeah, it's, so for me, from what I recall, you then go up a little hill, and then you're back on the main road, and then you go under that Panda sign. I can't remember, it was Run for Panda. We did it for Panda. It's a great charity. And then you can see the finish. You've got a mile to go, like the Citgo in Boston. You're passing that sign. You've got a mile to go. Talk us through that. You've got 1 mile to go, Dan. How was it?
Well, at that stage, I felt like I was Usain Bolt. You know, I finished a race and I said I passed probably 2,000 or 3,000 people. I was sprinting. I was doing so well. It turns out I didn't do that, but that's how I felt. I just felt like this is it now. I can see the finish line. People are screaming. Everyone's excited. And I just thought, you know, I'm going to do whatever I can, push as hard as I can, and I'll worry about it once I cross the line. But this is my kind of moment to do my very best. I hadn't looked down at my watch for a while. I wasn't really bothered about that, but I just thought this is the time now to leave nothing on the table and just go all the way to the end. And that's kind of what I did.
So it's fascinating how both of you, one's in Brighton, one's in Boston, and you ran your marathons within 24 hours. And I'm sure those who are watching as well, probably what you've both said exactly the same. And we hadn't spoke beforehand or anything. If anyone's watching think we've prepped all these sketches, the way you both described the finish, and I'm sure people who are watching, maybe it's exactly the same. You feel like you are sprinting. Down in Boston, you said you were just going flat out and you used the sprinting. And down in Brighton said Usain Bolt, which is sprinting. But both for crowds, and I've seen the crowds at Boston. From what I saw, the crowds at Brighton as well, massive, massive crowds at the finish, all screaming, and the noise. I mean, did you know that you'd already been running 26 odd miles down there with that crowd at Brighton screaming at you? You didn't feel any pain. Did you feel elation, joy?
Yeah, I felt,
oh my God, what happened?
I felt really strong in that last mile, and I thought, actually, I'm feeling really good. I'm going to be running again tomorrow. These legs are fine; they're fresh. But like you see, you got 6 or 7 people deep in the crowds either side. I mean, I had family who couldn't even get close to the finish line. But yeah, you just feel like this is it now. It all comes to that kind of pivotal moment at the end where you cross the line. I even did one of these thinking there's going to be a photographer there. There wasn't. So you just got, I'm just doing this to nobody. But it was a moment where I thought, you know, this is it. This is what you've worked hard for. And at that stage, no, it didn't feel like I'd run the distance. It just felt like I was finishing a race. But it was only on reflection you start to think, wow, that was a long time on the legs.
Yeah. I mean, for both of you guys, I mean, it really doesn't matter what time people finish the marathon. It's just getting to the finish, and it's a great achievement. So you're both full of elation and joy, and it's a week on now. It's Sunday. Obviously, it's a week to the day that Brighton had happened, and it'll be a week tomorrow of Boston. But a week on now, guys, and you finished your marathons. You've got your medals. You feel super proud. And I'll just go through, before I go into that, my final question is that some of the comments on here coming through, Lydia Biassi has commented that, and James Benjamin was saying, really enjoyed everyone who comes and supports Lydia. Completely grateful, so thanks. And Lydia responding, nice to hear, James. We got a few thank yous from struggling people, and it makes you feel really helping. So yes, really helping. And it's... Power station is grim, but the Portaloos are a godsend. That's in Brighton. Yeah, the Portaloos are a godsend, Col. And people having a bit of a chuckle between the Portaloos. But where would it be in a marathon without Portaloos? And James Benjamin sounding like Dan had a fab experience. So yeah, you both had a fab experience. So it's fantastic to see that. But in terms of my key question, and I think I'll continue, and you've been very patient there, Dan, over in Boston. But I'll come back to Dan in Brighton, because I know what next is. But if you want to explain to what next for you, you know, you're a week on. You said when you finished, you felt like running again, which is obviously it's all up here. Maybe the legs might have said something else. But what next for you, Dan?
So yeah, a few days before I actually did the Brighton Marathon, I booked myself a 25k just sort of traily riverside race, because I wanted to have a future focus. I didn't want it to just be, this is the end and I won't ever run again until maybe next Christmas where I start a plan. I didn't want that to happen. So I booked that, and then after a few days, or this week rather, I then booked another marathon for mid-August.
Another marathon. So it's interesting that you've said, for a lot of people, one of the key motivations is having something booked. If you believe you've got the bug of running, because a lot of people have got the bug and want to continue running, and for others it's just a thing to do, and they'll continue doing it recreation, which is fine as well. But often the key thing is booking an event before you run the marathon, because you may get feelings that you may not want to run ever again at the end of a marathon, but which is fine as well. But so which marathon have you got in August? I mean, that's going to be a hot one, isn't it? In the UK, is it, Dan?
Yeah, it's in the UK. It's a Thames meander, which runs from Kingston along the river, and it was one of those races where I think for the environment, I just wanted to run alongside the river, basically. And I thought that might just be something that I want to do for myself. I know it might not be a named race as such, and not one that's necessarily kind of a worldwide thing. But yeah, I booked that, and it could be hot. We don't know with the British weather, do we? It could be any sort of weather. I know normally the end of August, that bank holiday weekend is normally dreadful.
You could get torrential rain and all sorts, but you would expect it to be warmer, whether it's raining, drizzling, sunny, or whatever. You'd expect it to be warmer. But yeah, we can't predict the weather anywhere really. I guess similar to Boston in Massachusetts, it can change quite regularly. We are on an island here, so the weather can change. So well done to you. You've got your next marathon, because the question here that did come in is, when are you doing your next marathons? So you've already booked that in down in Brighton. So you've all got that planned. You obviously started the training already. Is that right, Dan, for that next marathon?
Yeah, that starts, well, officially it starts today. It was a kind of a 16-week plan that I just want to obviously maintain my current fitness and then focus on a couple of techniques and skills that maybe I didn't spend too much time on in my first block of training. So there's no expectation to suddenly deliver a fast time that's superior to my first marathon, but it's just maintaining that and turning up and giving it my best shot the second time round.
So why a trail? Because it's going to be completely different going from a big city marathon in Brighton, where you've got tens of thousands of spectators, to running along the river, where I don't think there'll be many people. No,
exactly. I watched a video on YouTube about it, and I just thought that seems like the kind of thing that I'd like to do, and kind of doing it for yourself. And as much as it's absolutely wonderful to have the crowd support, I just thought this is something that I would like to take on. And yeah, I didn't really give it too much thought in terms of how it might differ hugely from Brighton, other than I just thought that gives me 16 weeks to focus on some things that I know are areas for development, and I'll give it my best shot.
Brilliant. So I mean, to me, I'm almost tempted. It sounds tempting, but when you've seen me bike rides I've done the past few days, just cycling along the canal is tough enough, let alone running the distances. And I think someone commented that they had ran from Kings Norton to Stratford upon Avon, which is a long way. I think that might be longer than a marathon distance, but it's a long way. But you're going to have a great time, I think, Dan, on that route. But the question to Dan over in Boston, what next for you, Dan? And yeah, I mean, we're getting some great comments on here. What next for you, Dan, in Boston?
Well, first of all, I just want to shout out to Lydia Biasi. She was not only a spectator on Heartbreak Hill, a dear friend, and not only a spectator on Heartbreak Hill, but she was a spectator way out in, I don't know, Natick or Framingham also. And if you know Boston, and you know Boston traffic and Boston Marathon, street closures and everything, that is a logistical nightmare to get from one part of the course to another part of the course and actually see me both times. So that was a marathon of effort in
it's logistics itself. Isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. So thank you, Lydia. And but in terms of what's next, well, this is not one and done, that's for sure. So that much I already know. I can't imagine that I'll run another Boston, because I can't assume that I'll qualify. And
never say never, Dan. Never say never. I was the same after my first marathon. Says, who the hell came up with these qualifying times? It's nonsense for someone my age. And here I am qualifying every year. But hey, you never know, Dan.
I know, exactly, and I'm certainly not giving up on that. And the charity thing, I think I found the charity that means something to me. I can't imagine doing this again for another charity. So so Boston may be on the back burner for a while, but definitely another marathon. I don't know, maybe as early as this fall, but certainly a next spring marathon for sure. Nothing planned yet, and I wouldn't mind doing a smaller, lesser known marathon, maybe in a different state. Do something along those lines. In the meantime, between now and then, maintain my fitness, work on speed, clearly, and the weekend warrior stuff, the 5Ks, the fun runs, the 10Ks, just to get out there and move my legs, and celebrate any opportunity to do that.
That sounds fabulous, Dan. And obviously from the background that you've come from, now that you've obviously got the running bug back again. I think, as you've said, for a lot of people, it's not just about running another marathon. Running the 5Ks and the 10Ks, those are still long distances, and it's about working. I mean, I've got friends who just look at improving their park run times, which is 5K, and that's great. You don't have to go out and run your 10Ks, half marathons, but yeah, a low key one sounds a good idea there, Dan. So obviously over in the US, there is a whole plethora of marathons that you can do that are low key.
Yeah, and I'm definitely researching those.
Yeah, maybe I should fly over and come and film you as we run around somewhere.
Oh, that would be an honor beyond belief. Absolutely.
I just got to work out the usual logistics, but with knowing my luck, they might cancel that accommodation as well. But anyway,
you got to book 2 rooms. But exactly.
I was going to say, we've now been on for like an hour and 15 minutes, guys. We've had a tremendous time. I'm going to just slowly wind this up, everybody. So thank you so much for everybody who's been watching. There's been a lot of banter and comments on the chat. And I've got to say a big thank you to the 2 guests, the 2 Dans from Brighton and Boston. So thank you, Dan in Boston.
Thank you so much, Donato. This was such a thrill and such an honor, and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan. And Dan over in Brighton, who lives in Surrey.
Yeah, thank you very much, Donato. I really appreciate being part of this experience. And well done to Dan over in Boston.
Well done, guys. Thank you both so much. And I say thank you to everybody who's been watching. And for those of you who've managed to get all the way to the end here, give yourself a thumbs up and subscribe. So if you've managed watching this on replay for the whole hour and a quarter, hopefully you found there's some amazing tips. Listening to these guys, you can see firsthand what it means to someone to run not only a prestigious marathon, but their first marathons, and doing the training that's needed and respecting the distance, which helps you enjoy the process. And I think without there is links to the guys below. I've put a link to Dan Leone's charity page where you can contribute to, and it's amazing to see, Dan, that you've gone over the $10,000 fundraising, which is absolutely amazing. I think I think you had to raise $7,000, $7,500, so you've way surpassed that. So hats off to you, Dan, for raising all that money. Absolutely brilliant. And to Dan Runs, if you want to continue to follow Dan, he does have his own YouTube channel. And I've left the links below also to Dan Runs for his channel. And you can watch him on his next marathon and his onward journey. It sounds like both of these guys have got the bugs, the running bugs, and they can continue running and doing their own thing. And for those of you watching, just do your own thing. Do you enjoy? And if you want to take part in a marathon, rewind this, watch it all, listen to these 2 guys and listen to what they've been through. And there's lots of little hints and tips on there. And one guy has commented here, Tom Dillon, it took 5 hours and 4 minutes, and he did comment of fun. So obviously 5 hours and 4 minutes of fun, which sounds great, Tom. And Lydia is responding back to you, Dan, saying, thanks, Dan. All I did was a drive, a lot easier than running. So but I think for a lot of supporters, it's both things. I think everybody appreciating everybody's help, and it's fantastic. So from Boston to Brighton to Birmingham here in the United Kingdom, I bid you all farewell. And thank you all so much for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you at the next show, where I'm going to continue doing some cross training on the bike. So thank you all so much. Peace out And wherever you are, whatever you do, keep calm and carry on. Okay, bye-bye.